He despised his maid, but when he lost everything, she was the only one who offered him support. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. From his corner office on the 52nd floor of the Carter Industries building, Max Carter watched Manhattan glitter in the morning sun. The early October light caught the glass and steel of surrounding skyscrapers, creating a kingdom of mirrors that seemed to bow before him. At 42, he had built an empire that others spent generations trying to achieve, and he'd done it all himself. "Mr. Carter," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board members are waiting in the conference room." Max straightened his bespoke Tom Ford suit and adjusted his platinum Rolex. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." He didn't bother adding a thank you. In his world, gratitude was a currency he rarely spent. The elevator ride down 3 floors to the conference room gave him time to review the morning's numbers on his phone. Another record quarter. Another reason for the board to worship the ground he walked on. The doors opened to reveal Monica Harris, one of his housekeepers, cleaning the brass railings in the hallway. She quickly stepped aside, keeping her eyes down as he passed. Max barely registered her presence, the same way one hardly notices a piece of furniture. The board meeting went exactly as expected. Profits up 30%, market share expanding, 3 smaller companies acquired and streamlined, a process that had left hundreds unemployed but had doubled shareholder value. Max delivered his presentation with the cold precision of a surgeon, his steel-grey eyes scanning the room as he spoke about necessary restructuring and operational efficiency. "Excellent work as always, Max," Richard Burlington, the oldest board member, commented. "After the meeting, though I did hear some grumblings from the unions about the latest layoffs." Max's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "The day I start worrying about union complaints is the day I should retire. This company isn't a charity, it's a machine, and machines need to run efficiently." Back in his office, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside was an invitation to the mayor's annual Business Leadership Gala, where he was to receive an award for excellence in corporate innovation. Max smirked. Another trophy to add to his collection, another evening of rubbing shoulders with New York's elite. His fiancée, Victoria Pierce, would be thrilled. She lived for these events, though Max suspected she lived more for the publicity they generated for her social media presence than anything else. The rest of his day was a blur of meetings, calls, and decisions that would reshape the lives of people he would never meet. By 6 in the evening, when most of his employees were hurrying to catch their trains home, Max was still at his desk, reviewing proposals for his next acquisition. The cleaning crew had started their evening rounds. Through his office's glass walls, he caught glimpses of Monica again, methodically working her way through the executive floor. Something about her persistence irritated him. 15 years she'd been cleaning his offices and his home, and he couldn't remember ever having a real conversation with her. Not that he wanted to. In his mind, she was just another cog in his well-oiled machine. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Don't forget dinner with the Hamiltons tonight, 8 p.m. at Le Bernardin." Max had forgotten, but it didn't matter. He never forgot anything important, and the Hamiltons, with their old money and connections, were very important indeed. He gathered his things, shrugging into his cashmere coat as the autumn wind rattled the windows of his office. On his way out, he passed Monica one final time. She was gathering trash from the offices, her movements efficient but tired. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met in the reflection of a window. Max saw something in her gaze, not subservience or fear, but a quiet dignity that made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. He quickened his pace to the elevator. The ride down to the lobby gave him time to shake off that strange moment. By the time he stepped into his waiting town car, Max had already forgotten Monica's existence again. His mind was on the dinner ahead, on the deals to be made, on the empire that grew taller and stronger with each passing day. What Max Carter didn't know, couldn't know, was that empires can fall in the blink of an eye. And sometimes, the people we refuse to see are the only ones who can help us rise from the ruins. His driver pulled away from the curb, merging into the endless flow of Manhattan traffic. Above them, the Carter Industries building reached into the darkening sky like a monument to ambition itself. Soon, the first stars would appear, but Max wouldn't notice them. He never looked up anymore, too focused on the kingdom he'd built to remember that even the mightiest towers cast the longest shadows. Monica Harris's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., the same way it had every weekday for the past 15 years. In the pre-dawn darkness of her small Brooklyn apartment, she moved quietly, careful not to wake Kayla. Her daughter's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and Monica paused there for a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of her child's chest. The kitchen light flickered as she turned it on, another item on her endless to-do list. She prepared Kayla's lunch with practiced efficiency, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, carrot sticks, and a small note that read, "Dream big, baby girl. Love, Mom." These daily messages were their special ritual, a reminder that even when they were apart, their hearts stayed connected. Her morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance through time and space. She left breakfast for Kayla on the counter, along with detailed instructions for Mrs. Rodriguez next door, who would make sure her daughter got to school safely. Then she caught the 5:45 a.m. train to Manhattan, using the long ride to review Kayla's homework assignments for the week. By 7 a.m., Monica was already at work in Max Carter's Manhattan mansion, a sprawling penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of an exclusive Upper East Side building. The contrast between her cramped apartment and this palace in the sky never failed to strike her. While she dusted the Italian marble countertops and arranged fresh orchids in hand-painted vases, Monica thought about the scholarship applications she'd been helping Kayla prepare. Her daughter was only 10, but Monica was determined to give her every possible advantage. "The master requires his blue Brioni suit pressed for this afternoon's meeting," Mrs. Walsh, the house manager, announced as she swept into the kitchen. "And Miss Victoria called to say she'll be hosting a dinner party tonight for 12 people." Monica nodded, already mentally rearranging her schedule. She'd have to call Mrs. Rodriguez and ask her to keep Kayla a little longer today. These last-minute changes were common in the Carter household, where the staff's time was considered infinitely flexible. As she pressed Max's suit in the laundry room, Monica's attention was caught by a news alert on the small TV she kept playing in the background. "Financial watchdog opens investigation into major Wall Street firms." She turned up the volume slightly, listening as the reporter mentioned suspicious trading patterns and potential regulatory violations. The day progressed with its usual rhythm until Monica heard raised voices from Max's home office. Through the closed door, she could make out fragments of an intense conversation. "I can't hide this forever, Max." A man's voice, unfamiliar and angry. "The SEC is asking questions." "Lower your voice, David." Max's tone was cold but controlled. "Everything is perfectly legal." "Legal? The shell companies? The offshore accounts? Get out!" 2 words, delivered with such menace that Monica instinctively stepped back from the door. She busied herself with cleaning the hallway mirror as a man in an expensive suit stormed out, his face flushed with anger. Or fear, perhaps both. Later that afternoon, while Monica was preparing the dining room for Victoria's party, she overheard another tense conversation, this time between Max and his fiancée. "What do you mean, just in case?" Victoria's voice carried from the master bedroom. "Why would I need to distance myself from your assets? It's a precautionary measure, nothing more." Max sounded tired, his usual confidence frayed at the edges. "The market's volatile right now." "Don't lie to me, Max. I saw the news. I heard the rumors." A drawer slammed shut. "I need to know what's really going on." Monica continued her work, invisible as always. She watched through the reflection in the window as Victoria stormed out of the bedroom, designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors, her phone already pressed to her ear as she stepped into the elevator. The dinner party was cancelled an hour later. That evening, as Monica prepared to leave, she noticed something unusual. Max Carter, the man who normally worked until midnight, was sitting in his darkened office, staring at nothing. His tie was loosened, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. For a moment, he looked less like a titan of industry, and more like a man watching his world crumble. Their eyes met briefly as Monica gathered her things to leave. This time, there was something different in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even vulnerability, but it vanished as quickly as it had. Appeared, replaced by his usual mask of indifference. On her late train ride home, Monica thought about that moment. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror 15 years ago, when she'd learned she was pregnant and the father of her child had disappeared without a trace. It was the look of someone whose carefully constructed world was about to shatter. She found Kayla still awake, waiting for her with a drawing she'd made in art class. It showed their small family, just the two of them, standing in front of a house with a garden. "One day, Mom," Kayla said, her young face bright with hope. "One day we'll have our own house." Monica hugged her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her coconut shampoo. "One day, baby girl. But you know what? We already have everything that matters right here." As she tucked Kayla into bed, Monica's thoughts returned to the scene in Max's office. In all her years of working for him, this was the first time she'd seen him look afraid. Something was coming. Something big enough to shake even the mighty Max Carter. What Monica didn't know yet was that she would soon be faced with a choice: to help the man who had never seen her, or to walk away and let him face the storm alone. But that decision was still days away, hidden in the future like the first light of dawn behind the Manhattan skyline. The morning everything fell apart began like any other. Max Carter stood in his penthouse kitchen, watching Bloomberg TV, while his housekeeper, Monica, he reminded himself, though he'd never bothered to use her name, prepared his usual breakfast of steel-cut oats and fresh berries. The crawl at the bottom of the screen caught his attention first. Breaking: SEC launches major fraud investigation. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as the anchor's voice filled the room. In a shocking development, federal authorities have opened a widespread investigation into Carter Industries and several affiliated companies. Monica's hands stilled over the bowl of berries. The sound of them rolling across the marble counter seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Max's phone erupted. Calls, texts, emails, all demanding immediate attention. His lawyers, his board members, his investors, Victoria. He ignored them all, transfixed by the television screen as his life's work was dissected in bright, garish headlines. "Mr. Carter?" Monica's voice was soft, concerned. He barely heard her. The next hours passed in a blur of chaos. His office became a war room, filled with lawyers and crisis managers. Words like securities fraud, insider trading, and criminal charges echoed through the halls of power he'd built. Each passing hour brought new revelations, new accusations, new betrayals. By noon, Carter Industries stock had plummeted 70%. By 2, the board had called an emergency meeting. By 4, they had voted to remove him as CEO, effective immediately. "It's temporary," they assured him, none meeting his eyes, "until this situation is resolved." Max watched them file out of the boardroom, men and women who had fawned over him just days ago, now unable to look at him. Through the glass walls, he could see Monica cleaning nearby, her movements careful and measured. She alone seemed unchanged by the day's events, as constant as the sunrise. The final blow came that evening. Max returned to his penthouse to find Victoria waiting, her Louis Vuitton luggage arranged artfully by the door. "I can't be associated with this scandal," she said, twisting her engagement ring off her finger. "My brand can't take the hit." She set the ring on the counter like it was something contaminated. "I've already spoken to my publicist. We're releasing a statement that I had no knowledge of your activities." Max laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the marble floors. "Your brand, is that what we were? Don't pretend this is about love, Max. It never was." And she checked her reflection in a mirror, adjusting her perfect hair. "We both got what we wanted from this arrangement. Now it's time to cut our losses." He watched her walk away, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on his imported Italian tiles. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and she was gone. Monica appeared silently, beginning to clear away Victoria's untouched coffee cup. Max noticed for the first time that she moved with a peculiar grace, like someone who had learned to navigate the world without disturbing it. "Leave it," he snapped, harsher than he'd intended. She paused, then continued her work as if he hadn't spoken. His phone buzzed again, his asset manager this time. "All accounts frozen, federal investigation. Need to prepare for significant lifestyle changes." Max's legs gave out, and he sank onto his custom leather sofa. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting his kingdom in shades of blood and gold. From this height, the city looked the same as it had yesterday, but everything had changed. A quiet cough drew his attention. Monica stood in the doorway, her bag over her shoulder, ready to leave for the day. Something in her posture suggested hesitation. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know it's not my place, but when my world fell apart, I learned that sometimes an ending can be a beginning if you let it." He stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time. There was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet understanding that made him deeply uncomfortable. "What do you know about my world?" he asked, but the usual bite was missing from his words. "I've cleaned it for 15 years, she replied simply. "I know every corner of it." She paused, then added, "And I know that the ones who survive aren't always the strongest, but the ones who are willing to change." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone in his rapidly darkening penthouse. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle, as indifferent to his fall as they had been to his rise. His phone buzzed one final time. His lawyer. "Max, they're freezing everything, the penthouse, the cars, all of it. You need to make arrangements. Find somewhere to go." The message trailed off into silence. Max looked around his pristine apartment, at all the precious things he'd accumulated. None of them seemed real anymore. None of them could help him now. In the kitchen, Victoria's abandoned engagement ring caught the last light of day, throwing off tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. Max picked it up, this small circle of platinum and diamonds that had once represented a future, now just another artifact of his collapsed empire. Through the window, he could see Monica walking out of the building far below, a small figure moving purposefully through the gathering darkness. She turned once, looking up at the towering building, before disappearing into the stream of humanity flowing through the city streets. Max didn't know it yet, but in a few days, she would be the only person left in his world willing to offer him shelter. For now, he stood alone in his glass tower, watching night fall on the ruins of everything he'd built, everything he'd been. Tomorrow, the newspapers would call it the fall of an empire. But empires, Monica had said, aren't built on marble and gold, but on the choices we make and the people we become. It would take Max Carter months to understand what she meant, but the lesson was already beginning, here in the darkness of his crumbling kingdom. Monica wasn't expecting to find Max Carter sitting on the steps of her apartment building at 5:30 a.m., his expensive suit wrinkled and his hair disheveled. She almost walked past him. The man looked nothing like the imperious figure who had commanded boardrooms just days ago, but something in his lost expression made her stop. "Mr. Carter?" He looked up, and Monica caught the faint smell of alcohol. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his 5 o'clock shadow had grown into something more desperate. "They took everything," he said, his voice hoarse. "The penthouse, the cars, the accounts, all frozen or seized. Even my hotel room. They cancelled my cards." Monica glanced at her watch. In 30 minutes, Mrs. Rodriguez would arrive to take Kayla to school. She had a choice to make, and not much time to make it. "Come inside," she heard herself say, "before someone sees you." The 3 flights up to her apartment felt longer than usual. Max stumbled once, and Monica caught his arm, surprised by how human he felt. In her mind, he had always been something more and less than human, a force of nature, a symbol of power. Now he was just a man who had lost his way. Her apartment's door stuck slightly. It always did in humid weather. Inside, the space was small but clean, filled with the evidence of a life carefully maintained on a budget. Homework papers on the kitchen table, a vase of discount flowers, walls decorated with Kayla's artwork. "You can sit," Monica said, gesturing to the worn but comfortable couch. "I need to get my daughter ready for school." Max sank onto the couch as if his strings had been cut. His eyes roamed the apartment, taking in details he'd probably never imagined existed in his employees' lives. The carefully patched curtains, the second-hand furniture, the wall calendar marked with bill due dates. Monica headed to Kayla's room, her mind racing. What was she thinking, bringing him here? But what else could she have done? "Baby girl," she called softly, sitting on the edge of Kayla's bed. "Time to wake up, and we have a guest." Kayla's eyes opened, bright with curiosity. "A guest? Who?" "Mr. Carter, my former employer. He needs some help right now, so he's going to stay with us for a little while." Kayla sat up, her expression serious beyond her years. Like when Crystal's mom helped her aunt after the hurricane, Monica's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's immediate understanding. "Yes, baby, just like that. Now let's get you ready for school." When they emerged from the bedroom, Max was standing by the window staring at the street below. He turned at their approach, and Monica saw him register Kayla's presence with something like shock, as if he'd never imagined his housekeeper might have a real life, a family. "This is my daughter, Kayla," Monica said. "Kayla, this is Mr. Carter." Kayla looked at him with unflinching directness. "You look sad," she said. "Mom makes really good pancakes when I'm sad." A sound escaped Max that might have been a laugh or a sob. "I haven't had pancakes in years." "Then you're really overdue," Kayla declared with the certainty of a 10-year-old. Monica moved to the kitchen, falling into her familiar morning routine. But now she was cooking for 3 instead of 2, and her former boss was standing awkwardly in her living room, looking lost among her Target furniture and family photos. "Sit," she told him, pointing to the small kitchen table. "Coffee's almost ready." As she mixed pancake batter, she could hear Kayla chattering away, apparently unimpressed by Max's former status. "That's my science project," she was saying. "We're studying environmental impact. Did you know one person's choices can affect the whole planet? Like butterflies causing hurricanes, but with people." Monica watched Max's face as he listened to her daughter. Something was happening behind his eyes, some slow, painful awakening to a world he'd never bothered to see before. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the small apartment. Outside, the city was waking up, traffic sounds filtering through. The windows, Mrs. Rodriguez would be arriving soon to walk Kayla to school. "Mr. Carter," Monica said as she set a plate in front of him, "you can stay here until you figure things out. The couch folds out into a bed, but there are rules." He looked up, syrup dripping from his fork. "Rules?" "Yes, you'll need to help with chores, no drinking, no self-pity parties, and most importantly—" She glanced at Kayla, who was happily drowning her pancakes in syrup. "You treat everyone in this house with respect." Max stared at his plate for a long moment. When he looked up, something had shifted in his expression. "Why are you helping me?" Monica thought about the question as she poured more batter onto the griddle. "Because 15 years ago, I was alone and scared, and someone helped me. Mrs. Rodriguez next door gave me a place to stay when Kayla's father disappeared. She taught me that sometimes the greatest act of strength is accepting help from others." The sound of keys in the door announced Mrs. Rodriguez's arrival. The elderly woman took one look at Max, raised her eyebrows at Monica, but said nothing. She simply helped Kayla gather her things for school. "Be good, baby girl," Monica said, hugging her daughter. "I'll see you tonight." After they left, silence filled the apartment. Max sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee cup as if it held the secrets of the universe. "I don't know how to be poor," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody does at first," Monica replied, starting to clear the dishes. "But you'll learn. We all do." She handed him a dish towel. "Here, you can start by learning how to dry dishes." Max Carter, former CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, took the towel with hands that trembled slightly. As Monica washed and he dried, the morning sun crept through the kitchen window, painting them both in the same golden light. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the small drama playing out in a Brooklyn apartment where a man was learning, for the first time, the simple dignity of honest work. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment, this simple act of washing dishes together, would become the first step in a journey that would change them both forever. Max's first week in Monica's apartment was a study in culture shock. Every morning, he woke to the sound of life happening around him. Monica's quiet footsteps, Kayla's cheerful chatter, the ancient radiator's persistent clanking. The couch that served as his bed left his back aching, and the constant noise from the street below kept him from sleeping deeply. But it wasn't the physical discomfort that troubled him most. It was the crushing weight of his new reality. On Wednesday morning, Monica found him staring at the newspaper's business section, his face ashen. The headlines were brutal. "Carter, Industries stock worthless. Federal investigation expands. Former CEO Max Carter named in class action lawsuit." Maybe you should skip the papers for a while," Monica suggested, gently removing the newspaper from his grip. "There are more important things to focus on right now." "Like what?" His voice was bitter. "Learning how to be poor." "Like learning how to be human," she replied, setting a cup of coffee in front of him. "Starting with today's job search." The word job hit him like a physical blow. "I had a job. I ran a Fortune 500 company. And now you need a different job." Monica's tone was matter-of-fact as she pulled out a folder. "I made you a resume. We need to remove some things. Employers tend to get nervous when you list CEO of a company under federal investigation as your most recent position." Max stared at the single sheet of paper she handed him. His entire career, stripped down to bare essentials, looked impossibly thin. "This is humiliating." "No," Monica corrected him. "This is surviving. Humiliation is a luxury you can't afford right now." She pulled out a second paper, a list of job openings she'd circled in red. "Pen. The diner 3 blocks over needs a dishwasher. The grocery store on Kingston is hiring stockers. Pete's Hardware is looking for someone with basic knowledge of—" "A dishwasher," Max interrupted, incredulous. "I have an MBA from Harvard." And right now you have zero income and a whole lot of legal troubles. Monica's voice softened. Look, Mr. Carter. Max, he said suddenly. Just Max. Mr. Carter died with my company. Something flickered in Monica's eyes. Approval, perhaps. Max, these aren't forever jobs. They're survival jobs. Everyone in this neighborhood has them. We do what we need to do until we can do what we want to do. Later that morning, Max found himself walking the streets of Brooklyn, resume in hand. Each store he entered, each application he filled out, felt like another step down from his former life. The teenage manager at the grocery store barely glanced at his application before filing it away. The hardware store owner seemed suspicious of his expensive shoes, the last remnants of his former wardrobe. It was at Pete's diner that his world shifted again. Pete himself, a burly man with forearms like tree trunks, looked over Max's carefully edited resume with shrewd eyes. "You're Monica's friend," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She worked for me." Pete's eyebrows rose. Monica Harris, best customer service worker I ever had, back when she was putting herself through college, before the baby came. He studied Max more carefully. "She vouching for you?" Max felt something twist in his chest. He'd never known. Monica had been in college. "She's letting me stay with her," he admitted. Pete nodded slowly. "Monica's got good judgment, usually." He set the resume aside. "Kitchen needs help. Starting pay is minimum wage, split shifts, mostly evenings. Want to give it a try?" That evening, Max returned to the apartment with aching feet and a new job. He found Kayla at the kitchen table, homework spread around her like a paper explosion. "Did you get a job?" she asked, looking up from her math worksheet. "Yes, at Pete's diner." "Oh, they have the best chocolate milkshakes." Her face lit up. "Maybe you can learn to make them." Max felt a laugh bubble up, surprising him. "I think I'll have to master dishwashing first." "You'll get there," Kayla said with complete confidence. "Mom always says everything worth doing takes practice." She frowned at her math homework. "Like these fractions. They're hard, but Mom says they're important." Max glanced at her worksheet. "Fractions gave me trouble too when I was your age." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like some help?" For the next hour, Max sat with Kayla, explaining fractions. In terms of pizza slices and pie charts, he found himself enjoying the way her face scrunched up in concentration, the moment of delight when she finally understood a concept. Monica found them like that when she returned from work, heads bent, together over the math problems. She paused in the doorway, something soft and surprised in her expression. "I got a job," Max told her, "at Pete's." "Pete's a good man," she said, setting down her bags. "Tough but fair." She started unpacking groceries, generic brands, Max noticed, carefully selected for price rather than prestige. "Did you get dinner?" "No, I didn't want to spend the money." The admission cost him something, but it felt important to say. Monica nodded, understanding in her eyes. "We'll have spaghetti. Kayla, go wash up and then help set the table." She turned to Max. "You too. If you're living here, you're part of the routine." As they ate dinner together, Max found himself watching Monica and Kayla's easy interaction, their inside jokes and comfortable silences. He thought about the Monica he'd never bothered to know, the college student, the single mother, the woman who somehow maintained her dignity while cleaning other people's homes. "The diner's uniform," he said suddenly. "I'll need to buy one, black pants and shoes." Monica nodded. "There's a Goodwill on Atlantic Avenue. We can go this weekend." She said it so matter-of-factly, without a trace of judgment, that Max felt something inside him crack and begin to heal. That night, lying on the couch that was slowly becoming familiar, Max stared at the ceiling and thought about dignity. He'd always believed it came from power, from success, from controlling others. But here, in this small apartment with its second-hand furniture and carefully budgeted meals, he was beginning to see a different kind of dignity, one that came from facing reality head-on, from doing what needed to be done, from helping a child understand fractions after a day of rejection. Outside, Brooklyn's night sounds filtered through the thin windows, distant sirens, neighbors' music, the rattle of the elevated train. Max closed his eyes, letting the city's rhythm wash over him. Tomorrow he would learn to wash dishes for a living. Tomorrow he would begin to understand what Monica had meant about survival being different from humiliation. Tomorrow he would take another step toward becoming someone new, someone who might eventually be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Max's first shift at Pete's Diner began at 4 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. He stood in the cramped employee bathroom, staring at his reflection in the spotted mirror. The black Goodwill pants were a bit short, and the white uniform shirt had a small stain near the collar that wouldn't come out no matter how hard Monica had tried to remove it. His hands, once manicured weekly, now bore small cuts from learning to handle industrial kitchen equipment during training. "You're up, Harvard," Pete called through the door, using the nickname he'd given Max. "Dinner rush is starting." The kitchen was a battlefield of sound and steam. Plates clattered, orders were shouted, and the industrial dishwasher roared like an angry beast. Max's trainer, a teenager named Luis, demonstrated the rhythm one final time. Scrape, rinse, rack, load, unload, dry, stack, repeat forever. "Remember," Luis said, "don't let them pile up. Once you fall behind, you're done for the night." The first hour wasn't too bad. Max found a rhythm, feeling an odd satisfaction in watching dirty dishes transform into clean ones. Then the dinner rush hit in earnest. "Behind you," a waitress called, squeezing past with a tray full of plates. Max flattened himself against the dishwasher, but not quickly enough. Hot water splashed down his front, soaking his shirt. "Welcome to the trenches, Harvard," Pete chuckled, tossing him a towel as he passed. "You'll dry eventually." By 8 o'clock, Max's back was screaming. His fingers were pruned from the constant moisture, and a pile of dishes seemed to multiply every time he turned around. The Harvard MBA, the former CEO, the man who once commanded a boardroom, was being thoroughly defeated by dirty plates and water-spotted silverware. "Need help?" Max turned to find Luis beside him, already grabbing a rack of dishes. "I'm fine," he said automatically, his old pride flaring. "Sure you are," Luis grinned. "But see those waitresses out there? They need clean plates for their tables. Your pride ain't paying their tips, so let me help." The words hit Max like a splash of cold water. How many times had he dismissed offers of help in his old life, seeing them as signs of weakness? How many people had he left struggling because he believed everyone should sink or swim on their own merit? Together, they tackled the mountain of dishes. Luis taught him tricks for maximizing each load, showed him how to angle the spray nozzle, to clean multiple items at once. By closing time, Max's clothes were soaked, his shoes were squishing, but the dishes were done. "Not bad for your first night, Harvard," Pete said, counting out Max's tips. "You stuck it out." Max stared at the small pile of $1 bills, his share of the tip pool. In his former life, this wouldn't have covered his morning coffee. Now, it represented 4 hours of honest labor. "The kitchen's short-staffed on prep work," Pete added casually. "You want to come in early tomorrow? I'll show you how to chop vegetables. Extra 2 hours on your check." "Yes," Max said, surprising himself with his eagerness. "Thank you." The walk home gave him time to think. His feet ached, his clothes were damp, and he smelled like industrial detergent. But there was something else too, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He found Monica and Kayla in the living room, working on a school project. Kayla was building what looked like a solar system model out of painted styrofoam balls and wire hangers. "How was your first day?" Monica asked, looking up from where she was helping Kayla attach Neptune to its orbit. "Wet," Max replied, managing a tired smile. Educational. Did you make any milkshakes yet? Kayla asked hopefully. Not yet, but I did learn how to properly wash the milkshake glasses. He pulled out his small stack of dollar bills. And I earned my first tips. That's great, Kayla beamed. Mom says tip money is the best because it means you did a good job and people noticed. Max looked at Monica, seeing wisdom in her parenting he'd never appreciated before. She was teaching her daughter the value of work itself, not just its rewards. I'm going to grab a shower, he said, then hesitated. But after, would you like help with the solar system? Kayla's face lit up. Yes, I need someone tall to hold Mars while the glue dries. Later that night, after Kayla had gone to bed, Max found Monica in the kitchen, preparing lunches for the next day. I never knew, he said quietly. Knew what? How hard it is. The physical toll, the constant pressure, he gestured vaguely, the humanity of it all. In my old life, people like Luis and Pete were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Monica continued slicing carrots for Kayla's lunch, but he could tell she was listening intently. When I had to cut costs, he continued, I never thought about the actual people, their tips, their extra hours of prep work, their kids' science projects. I just saw inefficiencies that needed to be eliminated. And now? Now I understand why you always made sure to know the cleaning staff's names, why you remembered their children's birthdays. They weren't just employees to you, they were people. Monica set down her knife, turning to face him. Everyone's a person, Max, even you. Maybe especially you now that you're learning to be one again. He thought about Luis helping him with the dishes, about Pete offering extra hours, about Monica and Kayla welcoming him into their home. All the small kindnesses he'd been too important to notice before. I have another shift tomorrow, he said. Pete's going to teach me food prep. Monica smiled. Get some sleep then. Prep work starts early. As Max settled onto his couch bed, his body aching but his mind oddly at peace, he realized what that unnamed feeling from earlier was. Purpose. Not the grand, world-changing purpose he'd once claimed, but something smaller and perhaps more meaningful. The simple purpose of doing a job well, of being part of a team, of contributing to the daily miracle of people caring for one another. He fell asleep to the familiar sounds of the Brooklyn night, dreaming not of boardrooms and stock prices, but of clean dishes and perfectly chopped vegetables, of solar systems made from styrofoam, and of all the small dignities he'd spent a lifetime overlooking. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and junk mail in Monica's mailbox. Max recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately, Blackwood and Associates, his former corporate attorneys. His hands trembled slightly as he read the carefully worded message. Dear Mr. Carter, opportunity to minimize legal exposure, cooperation with federal investigation, substantial evidence against other board members, immunity deal, return to position of influence. The words blurred together, but their meaning was clear. A chance to return to his old life, to escape the legal consequences of his actions by testifying against his former colleagues. All he had to do was cooperate, sign some papers, point fingers at the right people. He was still staring at the letter when Monica returned from dropping Kayla at school. Bad news? She asked, noting his expression. I'm not sure. He handed her the letter, watching as she read it carefully. After 2 months of living in her apartment, he'd learned to value her measured perspective. They're offering you away. Back, she said finally, her voice neutral. Yes. Max ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd picked up recently. If I testify against the board members, provide evidence of their involvement in the fraud, I could get immunity. Keep my professional licenses, maybe even rebuild my career. Monica set the letter down on the kitchen counter, And what about the people who weren't on the board? The employees who lost their jobs, their pensions? The question hit him like a physical blow. 2 months ago, he wouldn't have even considered them. Now, I don't know, he admitted. The letter doesn't mention them. Of course it doesn't. Monica started making coffee, their morning ritual now. Because to lawyers like Blackwood and Associates, those people are just collateral damage, numbers on a spreadsheet. She gave him a pointed look. Sound familiar? Before Max could respond, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but he answered anyway. Max, it's Richard Burlington. His former mentor's voice brought a rush of memories, board meetings, golf games, deals made over expensive scotch. I assume you received Blackwood's letter? Yes, I did. Good. Listen, son, this is your chance. The SEC is out for blood, but they'll settle for a few high-profile convictions. Play this right, and you could be back in the game within a year. Max glanced at Monica, who was deliberately busying herself with the coffee maker, giving him privacy while remaining close enough to offer support if needed. What about the employees? Max asked. The ones who lost everything? Burlington's laugh was dismissive. Come on, Max. You know how this works. The small fish always get eaten. It's just business. Just business. How many times had Max himself used those words to justify his actions? I need time to think about it, he said. Don't take too long. This offer has an expiration date. Burlington paused. And Max, keep this between us. Some of the board members, they wouldn't take kindly to knowing you're considering this deal. After hanging up, Max sat heavily at the kitchen table. Monica placed a cup of coffee in front of him. Simple diner coffee now, not the artisanal beans he once imported from Colombia. You know what Pete told me yesterday? He said suddenly. That I'm ready to start learning the grill. Said I have good hands for it, good timing. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. A month ago, that would have seemed like rock bottom. Now it feels like an achievement, Monica suggested softly. Yes. He took a sip of coffee. Luis is teaching his little sister to work the dishwasher now. She's saving for college, like you were once. Monica's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time he'd acknowledged knowing about her past. Pete told me, he explained, that first day when he hired me. He said you were putting yourself through college before Kayla, she finished. Before her father disappeared, and I had to choose between my education and my daughter. Max thought about choices, about the ones that had led him to build his empire on sand, and the ones that had brought him here, to this small kitchen where he was finally learning to see clearly. If I take this deal, he said slowly, I could go back, have money again, influence, maybe even help people this time, do things differently. Could you? Monica's voice was gentle but firm. Would they let you? Or would you have to play by their rules again, justify their choices, be the person they want you to be? The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the steam rising from their coffee cups. Outside, the city was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, neighbors calling greetings, the daily symphony of life going on. I have my first solo shift on the grill next week, Max said finally. Pete's letting me work the breakfast rush. Monica smiled, understanding what he wasn't saying. That's a big responsibility. Yes. He picked up the letter from Blackwood and Associates, feeling its heavy paper, its embossed letterhead. Once, this paper had represented everything he valued. Now it felt like a relic from another life. Would you mind if I used your phone? I need to make a call. She handed him her simple flip phone. No apps, no internet, just a basic tool for connecting with people. Max dialed Blackwood's number, his fingers steady now. This is Max Carter, he said when the secretary answered. Please tell Mr. Blackwood that I'm declining his offer, and I'd tell him I'm sorry, but I have to get to work. My shift starts in an hour. After hanging up, he looked at Monica. I probably just committed career suicide. No, she replied, starting to pack Kayla's lunch for after-school care. I think you just chose who you want to be. Max stood up, heading to his room, no longer just a couch, but his space in this home, to change into his work uniform. As he passed the refrigerator, he noticed Kayla had added a new drawing to its crowded surface. 3 figures standing together, labeled Mom, Me, and Max. Family, he realized, didn't always look the way you expected it to. Sometimes it was found in the places you least expected, with the people you once thought you were too important to see. His phone buzzed again, probably Burlington or maybe Blackwood himself. Max turned it off without checking. He had hash browns to prepare, eggs to fry, and people counting on him. Not board members or shareholders, but real people with real lives. And somehow that felt more important than all the corporate deals he'd ever made. The first signs of trouble came in the form of a persistent cough. Monica tried to hide it at first, muffling the sound behind her hand during breakfast, taking extra breaks at work to catch her breath. But after a week of working through increasing fatigue and fever, her body finally gave out. Max found her, collapsed in the hallway of the apartment building after her shift, barely conscious, her cleaning uniform soaked with sweat. Pneumonia, the emergency room doctor declared hours later. Quite severe. She'll need to be hospitalized for at least a week, possibly 2. Max sat in the hard plastic chair beside Monica's hospital bed, watching the IV drip steadily into her arm. She looked small and vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lights, so different from the strong woman who had saved him from the streets. Kayla, Monica whispered, her voice rough. She can't miss school. The attendance policy? I'll take care of it, Max promised. Just focus on getting better. But as he left the hospital that evening, the reality of his promise hit him. He was still learning to take care of himself, and now he needed to care for a 10-year-old girl while her mother recovered. More than that, he needed to figure out how to keep their fragile household from collapsing. Mrs. Rodriguez helped with the immediate logistics, agreeing to let Kayla sleep at her apartment. But I can't watch her during the day, she warned. My arthritis is acting up, and I have my own doctor's appointments. Max nodded, already calculating. He'd have to adjust his schedule at the diner, figure out how to be there for Kayla's school drop-offs and pickups. And then there were the bills, Monica's hospital stay, the rent coming due, utilities, food. Is Mom going to be okay? Kayla asked that evening as Max helped her pack an overnight bag. Her small voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were dry. She was trying so hard to be brave. Yes, Max said firmly. She's getting the best care possible. He didn't mention that he'd already called in the one favor he had left, reaching out to a former colleague who owed him, making sure Monica was assigned to the hospital's top pulmonologist. Can we visit her tomorrow? Of course, right after school. Max looked around the apartment, noting all the small tasks Monica somehow managed to complete every day. But first, we need to take care of some things here. Want to help me make a list? They sat at the kitchen table together, Kayla's homework pushed aside for the moment. She proved to be surprisingly organized, remembering details Max would have missed. The schedule for laundry day, when the electric bill was due, which foods needed to be restocked. Mom keeps all the important papers in that drawer, she said, pointing to a filing system Monica had created from repurposed cardboard boxes. And there's an emergency fund in the blue envelope, but we're only supposed to use that if it's really, really necessary. Max opened the drawer, finding everything meticulously organized despite the makeshift materials. Monica's budget was laid out in precise detail, with no room for error. His heart sank as he realized how quickly her illness would devastate their careful financial balance. The next morning brought a new challenge. Kayla needs a parent or guardian to sign this permission slip, Mrs. Rodriguez said, holding up a form, for the school science fair next week. She's been working on Her project for months. Max stared at the form, understanding the implications. He had no legal right to sign anything for Kayla. In the eyes of the law, he was nothing to her. "I'll talk to the school," he decided. "Explain the situation." The school secretary was sympathetic but firm. "Without legal authorization from Ms. Harris, we can't accept signatures from household friends. I'm not just a—" Max stopped himself. What was he exactly? A former employer turned charity case? A friend? Something more? He spent his break at the diner making calls, trying to navigate the bureaucratic maze. Pete, seeing his frustration, offered some unexpected wisdom. "No," the older man said, wiping down the grill. "When my sister got sick years back, her neighbor got something called temporary guardianship. Let her handle school stuff, medical forms, all that." That afternoon, in between his split shifts, Max visited Monica in the hospital with the guardianship paperwork. She was sitting up, looking marginally better, though still too pale. "Temporary guardianship?" She raised an eyebrow as she read the forms. "Just until you're better," Max assured her quickly. "For practical reasons, school forms, doctor visits, if needed. I know it's a lot to ask." Monica was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that reminded him of their first real conversation, when she'd laid out the rules for staying in her home. "Do you understand what this means, Max? What you're asking for?" He thought about Kayla's science fair project, about the morning rush to get her to school on time, about holding her hand in the hospital elevator when they came to visit her mother. "I understand that you trusted me when I had nothing," he said slowly, "that you gave me a chance to become someone better. I'm asking you to trust me again, to let me help the way you helped me." Monica picked up the pen from her hospital tray, but paused before signing. "Pete called, said you switched to morning shifts." "Yes, to be there for Kayla after school." "And the science fair?" "We've been practicing her presentation every evening. Did you know she's studying the effect of different types of music on plant growth? She's got quite a talent for experimental design." A small smile touched Monica's lips. "You've thought this through." "I'm trying to." Max felt something tighten in his chest. "Monica, I know I'm not... I never expected to... But Kayla and you've become... family?" she suggested softly. "Yes." The word felt right in a way his Harvard MBA and CEO title never had. Family. Monica signed the papers. That night, after helping Kayla polish her science fair presentation and tucking her into bed at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, Max sat alone in Monica's kitchen. The apartment felt empty without them, but not in the way his penthouse had felt empty. This emptiness had purpose. It was waiting to be filled again with homework sessions and shared meals, with Kayla's laughter and Monica's quiet wisdom. His phone buzzed, another message from Burlington, probably with another offer to make things right. Max deleted it without reading it. He had more important things to worry about: a grocery list to make, a science fair to prepare for, a family to protect. Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the windows. But inside, in this small apartment that had become his home, Max Carter was finally learning that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that don't show up on any balance sheet. Monica's return home from the hospital should have been a moment of pure joy. Instead, it coincided with a letter that shattered their fragile peace. Notice of a rent increase that would take effect in 30 days. Their landlord had decided to upgrade the building, raising rents throughout to match market rates. $150 more per month. Monica's voice was still weak from her illness as she read the notice. "That's impossible. We can barely manage the current rent." Max watched her sink into one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of worry visible in the slope of her shoulders. She'd lost weight during her hospital stay, and her usual strength seemed diminished. The timing couldn't have been worse. Her medical leave had already strained their resources to the breaking point. "We'll figure something out," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I can pick up extra shifts at the diner. You're already working doubles 3 days a week," Monica pointed out, "and someone needs to be here for Kayla." As if summoned by her name, Kayla appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her science fair trophy. She'd won first place while Monica was in the hospital, and the small plastic statue had become a symbol of their ability to overcome challenges together. "Are we going to have to move?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Monica reached for her daughter, pulling her close. "I don't know, baby, but whatever happens, we'll face it together." Max felt something shift inside him as he watched them. In his old life, problems were solved with money and power. Now he had neither, but he had something else, something more valuable. "Give me a day," he said. "I need to try something." The next morning, instead of heading to his usual shift at the diner, Max walked into the offices of Burlington Development, his former mentor's real estate company. The receptionist, who had once jumped to attention at his arrival, now regarded him with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Burlington is in a meeting," she said automatically. "Tell him Max Carter is here, about the Anderson Heights property." 5 minutes later, he was shown into the familiar corner office. Richard Burlington looked exactly as Max remembered. Expensive suit, carefully cultivated silver hair, the appearance of wisdom masking ruthless ambition. "Max?" Burlington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Finally come to your senses about the immunity deal?" "No." Max remained standing, refusing the offered chair. "I'm here about the apartment building on Anderson Heights, the one your company just acquired." Burlington's eyebrows rose. "Ah, your current residence." The pause carried volumes of judgment. "A smart investment. That neighborhood is ripe for gentrification." You mean displacement." Max stepped closer to the desk, forcing out families who've lived there for generations, who built that community. "It's just business, Max. You used to understand that." "I used to understand a lot of things wrongly." Max pulled out a folder, documents he'd spent the night preparing. "But I understand some things better now, like the fact that your Anderson Heights acquisition was financed through Meridian Trust." Burlington's smile flickered. "So? I still have friends at Meridian, friends who shared some interesting details about the loan application. The projected occupancy rates you claimed, they're inflated, the property assessments manipulated, the kind of details the bank's fraud department would find very interesting." "Are you threatening me?" Burlington's voice turned cold. "I'm negotiating." Max placed the folder on the desk. "Keep the current tenants. Maintain the existing rent rates for at least 5 years. In return, these documents never leave this room." "You've gotten soft, Max. Throwing away leverage like this for what? Some apartment you're squatting in?" "No." Max thought of Monica's quiet strength, of Kayla's determined practice for the science fair, of evening homework sessions and shared meals. "For my family." Burlington studied him for a long moment. "You really mean that, don't you?" "The mighty Max Carter, brought low by a housekeeper and her kid." "Brought high," Max corrected. "They lifted me up. I'm just trying to return the favor." Later that evening, Max sat with Monica and Kayla at their small kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread. He'd told them only that he'd worked something out with the landlord. The details of his confrontation with Burlington, the moral compromise of using threat to achieve justice, those he kept to himself. "Mom, can we get a plant?" Kayla asked, suddenly. "For my next experiment?" Max said he'd help me study drought resistance. Planning ahead for the science fair already. Monica smiled, some of her old energy returning. "I don't see why not, as long as we're staying." She glanced at Max, a question in her eyes. He nodded, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, maybe something more. "We're staying," he confirmed. "This is home." After dinner, as they cleared the dishes together, a routine that had once seemed beneath him but now felt like a privilege, Monica touched his arm. "What did it cost you?" she asked softly. "Keeping us here?" Max thought about Burlington's sneering face, about the leverage he'd sacrificed, about the bridges he'd burned. Then he looked at the refrigerator covered in Kayla's drawings, at the science fair trophy proudly displayed on the shelf, at the tiny apartment that had taught him more about wealth than his penthouse ever had. "Nothing that matters," he said. "Nothing that matters at all." Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm, buses rumbling past, neighbors calling to each other, music drifting from open windows. Inside, in their small piece of that great urban symphony, Max Carter finally understood what real power was. Not the ability to force others to bend to your will, but the strength to stand up for the people you love, to build something worth protecting, to choose what truly matters. He reached for another dish to dry, and Monica handed it to him without a word. They worked in comfortable silence, the sound of Kayla practicing her recorder in the next room filling the apartment with its imperfect but earnest music. It wasn't the life he'd planned, it was better. It was real. It was home. 6 months after the rent crisis, Monica stood in Pete's diner, staring at the for sale sign in the window with a mix of sadness and determination. Pete had announced his retirement the week before, planning to move to Florida to be closer to his grandchildren. The diner, a neighborhood institution for over 40 years, would likely be replaced by another soulless chain restaurant. "It's a shame," Max said, coming up beside her. He'd just finished his shift as the head cook, a position he'd earned through months of dedicated work. "This place means so much to the community." Monica nodded, watching the usual morning crowd through the window, elderly couples sharing coffee, workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts, students huddled over textbooks. Pete's wasn't just a diner, it was a cornerstone of the neighborhood. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about what to do with my savings, the money I set aside for going back to school." She turned to face Max. "But I'd need a partner, someone who understands both the business side and the human side." Max felt his heart skip a beat as he understood what she was suggesting. "Monica, that's your education fund, your dream. Dreams change." She smiled, glancing at a booth where Kayla sat doing homework. "Sometimes they get bigger, make room for more people." "A business partnership?" Max asked carefully, aware that they were discussing more than just the diner. "A partnership," Monica agreed, letting the word carry all its possible meanings. "What do you think?" Before Max could respond, the door chimed. A familiar figure in an expensive suit walked in. Richard Burlington. He surveyed the diner with the calculating eye of a developer. "Max," he said, noticing them. "Quite a coincidence. I was just about to make Pete an offer on this place." His smile was sharp. "Unless you're planning to outbid me with your short-order cook's salary." Max felt Monica's hand slip into his, a gesture of support that gave him strength. "Actually, we are interested in buying the diner, and we have something you don't." "Oh?" Burlington's amusement was evident. "What's that?" "Pete's blessing." The old man's voice came from behind them. He walked over, wiping his hands on his apron. "Been watching Max here learn every station. Treat my customers like family. Reminds me of myself 40 years ago." He turned to Monica and Max. "Come to my office. Let's talk numbers." Later that evening, after the papers were signed and plans were made, the three of them sat in their apartment. Kayla was excitedly designing a new logo for what would soon be M&M's Diner, incorporating elements from both her mother's and Max's initials. "Are you sure about this?" Max asked Monica quietly. "It's a big risk." "Life's full of risks," she replied. "The important thing is choosing the right ones with the right people." She paused, then added, "Speaking of which..." She pulled out another set of papers from her bag, adoption forms. "Kayla asked me about these last week. It was her idea." Max stared at the documents, emotion tightening his throat. After all this time, after everything they'd been through, Kayla wanted him to be officially, legally, what he'd become in his heart, her father. "She said," Monica continued softly, "that since you helped her win the science fair and taught her about business, math, and always check her homework, you're already doing the job. We might as well make it official." "What do you think?" he asked, his voice rough with feeling. Monica's answer was to reach for his hand again, just as she had in the diner. But this time, when their fingers intertwined, he felt the weight of all their shared moments, the early morning coffees, the late-night conversations, the quiet understanding that had grown between them. "I think," she said, "that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose." Kayla looked up from her drawing, beaming at them both. "Can we put a milkshake bar in the diner? Max makes the best ones now." "We'll see," Monica laughed. "First, we need to make sure we can handle being business partners." "And family," Max added softly. "That part," Monica said, squeezing his hand, "we've already figured out." The adoption papers sat on the table between them, next to the diner's purchase agreement and Kayla's design sketches. Outside, Brooklyn continued its eternal dance of life, sirens and music, laughter and arguments, the symphony of humanity that Max had once floated above, but now was proudly part of. He thought about his journey, from the glass towers of Manhattan to this small apartment, from corporate titan to short-order cook, from lonely emperor to cherished family member. He'd lost an empire but gained a home, lost power but found strength, lost everything he thought he wanted and found everything he truly needed. "So," Kayla said, pushing her finished design across the table, "when do we start?" Max looked at Monica, saw his own joy reflected in her eyes. "We already have," he said. "We started the day your mother opened her door to a stranger who needed help. We just didn't know it then." Monica touched the adoption papers gently. "Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. Like family," Kayla added wisely. "Like family," Max agreed, putting his arm around them both. These two people who had taught him that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in love, that real success isn't about what you have but who you become, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were always meant to have. Outside, the sun was setting on Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of promise. Inside, in their small apartment that had become the center of his world, Max Carter, former CEO, future diner owner, and soon-to-be official father, was exactly where he belonged. The empire he'd lost had been made of glass and steel, but the one he'd found was built of stronger stuff, trust, love, and the kind of bonds that no market crash could ever break. Tomorrow, they would start planning their new business. Tomorrow, they would begin the adoption process. Tomorrow, they would take another step in their journey together. But for now, they simply sat at their kitchen table, sharing dreams and making plans. Three people who had found in each other the family they had always needed. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.